You're listening to a special presentation of the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. At 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, on the evening of October 30th, 1938, the night before All Saints' Day, now generally celebrated as Halloween, an estimated 6 million Americans listened to the famous Orson Welles broadcast War of the Worlds, describing an invasion from Mars. An estimated 1 million people responded with sustained credulity and fear. Thousands responded with sheer panic. Some committed suicide. And in the small village of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, residents left their homes and shot holes in their city water tower, thinking that it was a Martian tripod invasion machine. The broadcast, ladies and gentlemen, was a psychological warfare experiment conducted by the Princeton Radio Project. The Rockefeller Foundation funded the project in the fall of 1937. An Office of Radio Research was set up with Paul F. Lazarsfeld as director and Frank Stanton and Hanley Cantrill as associate directors. Cantrill used a special grant from the General Education Board to study the effects of the broadcast. Cantrill published the study as a book titled The Invasion from Mars, a study in the psychology of panic. It contains a complete script of the broadcast. The book is one of a series of studies sponsored by the Federal Radio Education Committee. War of the Worlds, ladies and gentlemen, was broadcast by Mercury Theater on the air from a microphone in a New York studio of the Columbia Broadcasting System. Council on Foreign Relations member Frank Stanton was a CBS executive. Stanton would direct Radio Free Europe in later years. Regarding the program's realism, Cantrill writes, "The sheer dramatic excellence of the broadcast must not be overlooked. The unusual realism of the performance may be attributed to the fact that the early parts of the broadcast fell within the existing standards of judgment of the listeners. A few short weeks before this broadcast, millions of listeners had kept their radios tuned for the latest news from a Europe apparently about to go to war. They had learned to expect that musical programs, dramas, broadcasts of all kinds would be cut off in a serious emergency to inform our worn and eager and anxious public. A large proportion of listeners, particularly those in the lower income and educational brackets, have grown to rely more on the radio than on the newspapers for news. On this particular night, when the listener tuned to the Mercury Theater, he heard the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra coming from the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza Hotel of New York City. Soon after the first piece had begun, an announcer broke in. 'Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News.' This report brought the story of the first explosion on Mars. The music was resumed only to be followed by another break. 'Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested the large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch. This bulletin contains the information that a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey. The swing band gets in 20 seconds more, and then the invasion continues uninterruptedly." The last announcement comes from New York City, and the announcer says, "I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building, New York City. The bells you hear are ringing to warn the people to evacuate the city as the Martians approach. Estimated in last 2 hours, 3 million people have moved out along the roads to the north. Hutchison River Parkway still kept open for motor traffic. Avoid bridges to Long Island, hopelessly jammed. All communication with Jersey Shore closed 10 minutes ago. No more defenses. Our Army wiped out. Artillery, Air Force, everything wiped out. This May, the last broadcast, will stay here to the end. People are holding service below us in the cathedral. And in the background, ladies and gentlemen, you could hear voices singing hymns. Now I look down the harbor, all manner of boats overloaded with fleeing population, pulling out from docks. Then you could hear the sound of boat whistles. Streets are all jammed, noise and crowds like New Year's Eve in cities. Wait a minute, enemy now in sight above the Palisades. 5 great machines. First one is crossing the river. I can see it from here, wading the Hudson like a man wading through a brook. A bulletin's handed to me. Martian cylinders are falling all over the country. One outside Buffalo, one in Chicago, St. Louis, seem to be timed and spaced. Now the first machine reaches the shore. He stands, watching, looking over the city. His steel, cowlish head is even with the skyscrapers. He waits for the others. They rise like a line of new towers on the city's west side. Now they're lifting their metal hands. This is the end now. Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city. People in the streets see it now. They're running towards the East River, thousands of them dropping in like rats. Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue, 5th Avenue, 100 yards away. It's 50 feet. The announcer breaks off, and a field artillery radio operator is heard. 2X, 2L, calling CQ. 2X, 2L, calling CQ. 2X, 2L, calling CQ. New York. Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone? 2X, 2L. And then, that's the middle break of the broadcast. The double Roman numeral X, which stands for the number 20, X times 2, or 2X, ladies and gentlemen, are espionage code names for a double cross. The fictitious call letters can be interpreted by insiders in the intelligence community to mean double cross, to hell, 2X, 2L, double cross, to hell. Hadley Cantrill was born in Hiram, Utah, on the 16th of June in 1906. He graduated Dartmouth College with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology in 1928. He studied in Munich and Berlin, 1929 to 1930. He received a PhD in psychology from Harvard in 1931. In 1949, Cantrill received an LL.D., doctorate in law, from Washington and Lee University. Cantrill taught sociology at Dartmouth College from 1931 to 1932 and psychology at Harvard from 1932 to 1935 and Columbia University 1935 to 36. In 1936, ladies and gentlemen, Cantrill joined the Princeton Psychology Department. He remained a member of the department until his death in 1969. In 1950, Cantrill authored a book called Tensions That Cause Wars. Copyright 1950. In 1935, George Gallup of Gallup poll fame, Elmer Roper, and Archibald Crossley were studying opinion polling as a tool to help social scientists and psychologists learn about people's likes and dislikes. Gallup's and Roper's surveys appeared in Fortune magazine. After the war, Harry Truman would choose the director of Fortune magazine, Council on Foreign Relations member John Kenneth Galbraith, to direct European economic security policy. Roper would become deputy director for the Office of Strategic Services, known as the OSS, the precursor to the Central Intelligence Agency. The OSS Psychological Warfare Division staff included Council on Foreign Relations members Douglas Cater of the Aspen Institute, W. Phillips Davison of the Rand and Columbia think tanks, William Langer of Stanford University, and William S. Paley, who was the head of Columbia Broadcasting System, known to you as CBS. Gallup's, Roper's, and Crosley's work interested people in government, aspiring politicians, and market researchers. Gallup, Roper, and Crosley were not members of the academic fraternity. Established social scientists belittled their work. However, the studies interested Cantrill. One of Cantrill's earliest articles, The Social Psychology of Everyday Life, 1934, contained a plea for social psychologists to devote more attention to devising new techniques to study ongoing problems. Lester Markel, Sunday editor of the New York Times, asked Cantrill to write some articles about scientific polling in connection with the presidential campaign of 1936. Well, folks, Cantrill went to Princeton to talk with George Gallup. Gallup was flattered and offered Cantrill the use of his facilities at Princeton to conduct the research. In 1936, Cantrill and DeWitt Poole founded a quarterly publication called Public Opinion Quarterly. Harwood Childs was editor. Cantrill was associate editor. Poole was a State Department expert in anti-communist propaganda. Poole became chief of the Foreign Nationalities Branch of the Office of Strategic Services. Poole directed OSS efforts to recruit agents from immigrant communities. The agents spied on their neighbors and analyzed foreign language publications. The Public Opinion Quarterly Board of Editors included veteran psychological warfare experts Harold Laswell, Paul Lazarsfeld, and Frank Stanton. I believe that's Paul Lazarsfeld and Frank Stanton. DeWitt Poole would become president of the National Committee for a Free Europe, one of the CIA's largest single propaganda efforts. Council on Foreign Relations member Stanton directed the Free Europe Fund, a Central Intelligence Agency proprietary corporation that laundered the money for Poole's National Committee psychopolitical operations. Today, ladies and gentlemen, the Advisory Committee on Communication at Columbia University sponsors and publishes the Quarterly, the organ of Columbia University's American Association for Public Opinion Research. In 1984, CFR member Frederick T.C. Yu was on the Advisory Committee on Communication, and CFR member Daniel Yankelevich was on the editorial board of the Public Opinion Quarterly. The American Association for Public Opinion Research was founded in 1947. Its address is a post office box in Ann Arbor, Michigan. In 1993, the organization had 1,450 members and an annual budget of $170,000. It consists of 6 regional groups. Its members are described as individuals interested in the methods and applications of public opinion and social research. It still publishes the Public Opinion Quarterly. Cantrill published his research on Gallup's techniques in early issues of the Public Opinion Quarterly. The articles described how to better understand why people of various backgrounds, interests, loyalties, and information levels held certain opinions, and how to use this information to effectively gear research concerned with psychological and political dynamics of people into United States government operation to achieve policy aims. In effect, ladies and gentlemen, how to manipulate people to get them to do what you want them to do. In 1940, the Rockefeller Foundation funded Cantrill's establishment of the Office of Public Opinion Research. It was housed in the attic of Princeton University's Palmer Physics Building. Its purposes were, 1, to learn and study public opinion techniques systematically. 2, to gain insights into the psychological aspects of public opinion, how and why it changes, what motivates large segments of the public. 3, to build up an archive of public opinion data for the use of qualified scholars. And 4, to begin to follow the course of American public opinion during the war that had already started in Europe. The Office of Public Opinion Research also analyzed the effectiveness of Office of Strategic Service psychopolitical operations. OSS Deputy Director Elmar Roper established a similar research center at Williams College. Dr. Philip K. Hastings, one of Cantrill's former students, directed the Roper Center. The Roper Center received all of the Office of Public Opinion Research Center's files to help them get started. Now, Cantrill coined a term for this work. He called it policy research. Cantrill tells us, most relevant to the story of policy research are the efforts begun in 1940 by the Office of Public Opinion Research to utilize and adapt survey methods as the European war progressed and the United States became increasingly involved. This research dealt with three kinds of problems. One, devising questions that would help us to understand more clearly what the American people felt the United States should do vis-a-vis the war in Europe and what differences of opinion there were in various population groups. Two, formulating trend questions that could be repeated either at regular intervals or as events dictated. And three, testing the reliability of small samples. During 1940 and 1941, the Office of Public Opinion Research obtained all data through the American Institute of Public Opinion at cost. On September the 12th, 1939, the Council on Foreign Relations began to take control of the Department of State. On that day, Hamilton Fish Armstrong, editor of Foreign Affairs, and Walter H. Mallory, executive director of the Council on Foreign Relations, paid a visit to the State Department. The Council proposed forming groups of experts to proceed with research in the general areas of security, armament, economic, political, and territorial problems. The State Department accepted the proposal. The project, 1939 to 1945, was called Council on Foreign Relations War and Peace Studies. Hamilton Fish Armstrong was executive director. In February 1941, the CFR officially became part of the State Department. The Department of State established the Division of Special Research. It was organized just like the Council on Foreign Relations War and Peace Studies project. It was divided into economic, political, territorial, and security sections. The research secretaries serving with the council groups were hired by the State Department to work in this new division. These men also were permitted to continue serving as research secretaries to their respective council groups. Leo Pazvolsky was appointed director of research. In 1942, the relationship between the Department of State and the Council on Foreign Relations strengthened again. The department organized an advisory committee on post-war foreign policies. The chairman was Secretary Cordell Hull, the vice chairman, Under-Secretary Sumner Wells. Dr. Leo Pazvolsky, director of the Division of Special Research, was appointed executive officer. Several experts were brought in from outside the department. The outside experts were Council on Foreign Relations War and Peace Studies members Hamilton Fish Armstrong, Isaiah Bowman, Benjamin V. Cohen, Norman H. Davis, and James T. Shotwell. In total, ladies and gentlemen, there were 362 meetings of the War and Peace Studies Group. The meetings were held at Council on Foreign Relations headquarters, the Harold Pratt House, 58 East 68th Street, New York City. The Council's wartime work was confidential. The Pratt House, the Harold Pratt House. The name Pratt is found in use as a byname in 11th century England. Pratt, ladies and gentlemen, was the English nickname for a cunning trickster. Pratt comes from the Old English word proet, meaning trick. Pratt is the family name of the Marquesses and Earls Camden. They are descended from John Pratt, died in 1573, of Devonshire. The first Earl, Sir Charles Pratt, 1714 to 1794, was a childhood friend of William Pitt, 1708 to 1778, the first Earl of Chatham. Remember that, Chatham. England's Royal Institute of International Affairs headquarters is Chatham House, located at 10 St. James Square in London. In June of 1940, William Stephenson of British intelligence was setting up the British Security Coordination Group in the United States. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was preparing to send an unofficial observer to London. The President selected a man he had known for more than 30 years. His name was William J. Donovan. Stephenson's mission included influencing high-ranking government officials to bring the United States into the war. Joseph P. Kennedy was the United States ambassador in London. Kennedy had been advising the President against American involvement in the war. William Stephenson was pleased when the President's choice was Donovan for the mission. Donovan attended Columbia Law School with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Donovan was a World War I Medal of Honor winner. In 1929, Donovan was a Wall Street lawyer. In 1935, Donovan went to Rome, Egypt, and Ethiopia for the War Department to observe the Italian campaign against Ethiopia. In 1937, Donovan attended maneuvers of the German Army and inspected their tanks and artillery. In 1938, Donovan toured Czechoslovakia, the Balkans, and Italy, and visited the battlefields of the Spanish Civil War. Ladies and gentlemen, William J. Donovan was a member of the Knights Templar. In 1941, a new agency was created, the Office of Coordinator of Information. Donovan ran it. The agency pooled information gathered by all the intelligence services and used the information for psychological warfare purposes. The talents of psychoanalysis across the country were mobilized to study domestic morale and psychological warfare techniques on morale. The study was released as a top-secret psychological report in 1943. It included a study of Adolf Hitler and his influence on the German people. The psychologist leading the study was Dr. Walter Langer. Walter's brother William helped to evaluate Hitler. CFR member William L. Langer was OSS branch chief for research and analysis. He worked with CFR member William H. Jackson. Their OSS research included indirect assessment, ladies and gentlemen, was a way of evaluating a man's personality or state of mind without direct interview by a psychologist. William Langer used the technique to produce a psychological profile of Hitler as part of Donovan's top-secret OSS study. William L. Langer was a key figure in the intelligence community. William Langer, Allen W. Dulles, and Arthur Sweetster were members of the Council on Foreign Relations. They were specifically members of the Peace and Aims Group. Arthur Sweetster became the deputy director of the Office of War Information. Sweetser and Langer also worked together as members of the political group with John Foster Dulles, Allen's brother. General Donovan and Allen Dulles made a career of trying to have the Director of Central Intelligence assigned to the office of the President. Now, in his early career, William Langer was a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford. In World War I, Langer rose from private to sergeant and participated in the Saint-Mihiel and Argonne engagements. Langer's first significant book was The Diplomacy of Imperialism, 1935. Langer was a member of the Board of Analysts, Office of Coordinator of Information from 1941 to 1942. Chief of OSS Research and Analysis Branch, 1942 to 1945. Special Assistant for Intelligence Analysis to the Secretary of State, 1946. And Assistant Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, 1950 to 1952. After 1952, Langer served as a consultant to the Central Intelligence Agency. In his presidential address to the American Historical Association in 1957, Langer emphasized the need for deeper study and more extensive reference by historians to the teachings of modern psychology. William L. Langer was one of 10 editorial sponsors of the American edition of Mein Kampf, written in 1939. His view was that Hitler's Mein Kampf was an extraordinary medley of amateur politics and amazing insights into international problems and possibilities, and that Hitler showed reckless courage in realizing the German dreams, nightmarish as some of them were. N. Schuster was another Mein Kampf editorial sponsor. Like Langer, Schuster was a Council on Foreign Relations, Peace, and Ames Group member. Schuster also was a journalist. He served in France as a sergeant in Army intelligence in World War I. After the war, he was in the Army of Occupation in Germany. Schuster admired the German culture and sympathized with Germany's economic problems. In his book, The Germans, 1932, he glibly dismissed the ideas of Adolf Hitler as no more commendable for wisdom or practicableness than are the notions of the average United States senator. Schuster's views towards Hitler changed. In 1934, Schuster denounced the Nazis' assaults on individual and religious freedom. During World War II, Schuster served on the Enemy Alien Board. When the war began, Secretary of War Henry Stimson ordered an evacuation of all Japanese, alien and American alike, from the coastal regions of California. CFR member Stimson remarked that the evacuation made an awful hole in the Constitution, but he had to do it on the grounds of safety of the nation and out of military necessity. The Japanese, alien and American alike, were rationalized into concentration camps. Stimson didn't rationalize Germans, alien and American alike, into concentration camps. Did the Japanese-American evacuation recommendation come from the Enemy Alien Board? Mein Kampf's editorial preface warns, Mein Kampf is a propagandistic essay by a violent partisan. As such, it often warps historical truth and sometimes ignores it completely. We have therefore felt it our duty to accompany the text with factual information which constitutes an extensive critique of the original. No American would like to assume responsibility for giving the public a text which, if not tested in the light of diligent inquiry, might convey the impression that Hitler was writing history rather than propaganda. Mein Kampf's editorial introduction informs us historical truth was ignored completely for over 14 years. Quote, until now, the only version of Mein Kampf in English has been a condensation of the complete book published in 1933 under the title My Battle, prepared by E.T.S. Dugdale in England, containing less than half the total text. There are undoubtedly passages of great importance which now appear in English for the first time. For example, Chapter 5 of the condensed version left out the whole of what Hitler describes as his wartime reflections on propaganda and the methods for fighting Marxism. We have marked at various points in the text the important new material. Furthermore, any abridgment must necessarily fail in proportion to the degree of its condensation. To give the full flavor of the author's mind, even the repetitions have their significance in conveying a sense of the character behind them. Mein Kampf is, above all, a book of feeling. The translation here offered is from the first German edition, the 2 volumes, respectively, of 1925 and 1927, which are now quite difficult to obtain, end quote. The National Socialist German Workers' Party was founded on November 9, 1919. Hitler writes in the conclusion to Mein Kampf, On November 9, 1923, in the fourth year of its existence, the National Socialist German Workers' Party was dissolved and forbidden throughout the entire territory of the Reich. Today, in November of 1926, it stands again before us free through the whole Reich, stronger and internally more stable than ever before. The German people recognized the evil of Hitler and tried to do something about it. But it didn't work. Were World War I British and American intelligence agents left in Germany as part of an Institute of International Affairs plan to cause a Second World War? Did CFR intelligence agents help bring Hitler to power to create an enemy the American people could hate, loathe, and fight? Were CFR members Schuster, who wrote about Hitler in 1932, and Langer, who worked on a psychological profile of Hitler, and CFR insider Hadley Cantrell, who studied in Munich and Berlin from 1929 to 1930, three of those intelligence agents? Mein Kampf was published in 1925. Why wasn't a translation made available to the English-speaking people until 1939, and then contained only half the original text? Was this information withheld for 14 years so the Germans wouldn't receive support from other nations and Hitler could take power? Why weren't covert operations carried out to prevent Hitler's rise to power? Did the Office of Strategic Services put up funds for getting Mein Kampf translated, published, and marketed in the United States? Was Mein Kampf released in 1939 to help set the stage for ensuring America's entry into the war? Dumbarton Oaks in Georgetown is famous for being the site of the 1944 conference that led to the establishment of the United Nations. Present at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference were many members of the Council on Foreign Relations, War, and Peace Studies. Among those who had leading roles on many of the committees and commissions were George N. Schuster, William L. Langer, Arthur Sweetser, Hamilton Fish Armstrong, John Foster Dulles, Grayson Kirk, Dwight E. Lee, Isaiah Bowman, David N. Rowe, Winfield W. Riefler, Carter Goodrich, Calvin B. Hoover, Owen Lattimore, and Frank R. McCoy. Now, folks, many of these men attended the conference as members of or advisors to the State Department. 49 days later, the Council on Foreign Relations, Institutes of International Affairs, and Institutes of Pacific Relations achieved the aim they failed to achieve a quarter of a century before. At noon on 9th of October 1944, the text of the proposals the United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, and China agreed upon were issued simultaneously in Washington, London, Moscow, and Chongqing. The machinery to create one world government became a reality. Instead of being called the League of Nations, the organization was called the United Nations. This time, the American people weren't given the chance to say no. Today, American soldiers are part of a worldwide police force, forced to fight in times of peace, wearing non-American uniforms under the command of foreign officers. Their commander-in-chief is a draft-dodging, adulterous Council on Foreign Relations member who is a chronic liar and is about to sell United States nuclear technology to Communist China's president. Institute of Pacific Relations member Jiang Zemin, the butcher of Beijing, while keeping America in a state of perpetual national security due to the threat of nuclear terrorism. Now, sometime in 1942, the Office of Coordinator of Information was reorganized into two independent agencies, the Office of Strategic Services and the Office of War Information, known as OWI. William Donovan became the head of the newly created Office of Strategic Services. William Stevenson was head of the British intelligence counterpart. The psychological warfare study was moved into the domain of the Office of War Information. In a book entitled Unwritten Treaty, James P. Warburg writes, "This book is dedicated to the men and women of OWI who served at home and abroad on the far-flung psychological battlefronts of World War II, and whose skill and devotion created the voice of America." Warburg explains, "Psychological warfare against a declared or undeclared enemy is probably as old as human history. It consists of two basic elements, the threat or appeal to fear, and the bribe or appeal to greed. When the earliest savage raised his fist against a neighbor, he was using the psychological weapon of the threat. When he baited a trap, he was exploiting the appeal to greed. Bluff, bribery, and deception have played a part in every human struggle throughout history, but it remained for our generation to develop psychological warfare as a means of systematic nationalistic aggression. Psychological warfare aims at the undermining of a people's confidence in its cause, its strength, its leaders, and itself, and at the destruction of its determination to fight for its cause or even for its life. This combination of confidence and determination we call morale. When a nation's morale is destroyed, it commits suicide, as did Austria, or else it submits to conquest after feeble and disorganized resistance, as did France. In any case, it reaches a state of mind in which resistance seems hopeless and surrender less of an evil than endurance of armed conflict. Psychological warfare against an enemy nation seeks to paralyze the will of that nation by spreading confusion, by alternating excessive hope and excessive fear, by exploiting every cleavage and adding fuel to every prejudice. Its chief weapon is propaganda. That is the dissemination of ideas. But propaganda, to be effective, must be based upon full and carefully analyzed intelligence concerning the enemy, and must be coordinated with espionage, fifth-column activity, and actual sabotage. All these assignments are carried out by the implantation of carefully selected ideas and concepts. These ideas and concepts are neither necessarily true nor necessarily false. In fact, whether they are true or false makes no difference whatsoever so long as they successfully serve to create the desired state of mind. It follows that there is no validity whatsoever to the widely held belief that propaganda consists by definition of spreading of lies. Truth and falsehood make no difference in themselves. There is equally little justification for the belief that the propaganda of decent democratic nations should be the truth and nothing but the truth. It cannot be stated with sufficient emphasis that information is one thing, propaganda quite another. The purpose of spreading information is to promote the functioning of man's reason. The purpose of propaganda is to mobilize certain of man's emotions in such a way that they will dominate his reason. The function of an information agency is to disseminate truth to a make-available fact and opinion, each carefully labeled and separated from the other. The aim of an information agency is to enable as many people as possible to form their own individual judgments on the basis of relevant facts and authoritative opinion. The function of a propaganda agency is almost the exact opposite. It is not to inform, but to persuade. In order to persuade, it must disseminate only such fact, such opinion, and such fiction masquerading as fact as will serve to make people act or fail to act in the desired way. The Office of Coordinator of Information and the Office of War Information weren't information agencies, they were propaganda agencies. The Office of War Information extended contracts for communications research to Paul Lazarsfeld, Hadley Cantrill, the Council on Foreign Relations member Frank Stanton, The famous Orson Welles' War of the Worlds was an experiment in psychological warfare. The American public became unwitting subjects in an experiment to study mass behavior to try to determine the factors of personality, experience, and circumstance that made for various degrees of suggestibility under the impact of fear. Fear. The experiment in terror was planned, coordinated, and carried out by Council on Foreign Relations members and insiders. Isn't an experiment of this nature immoral and illegal? And if they were doing that then, what, pray tell, are they doing now? Adolf Hitler and his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, warped history by ignoring it completely and stressing favorable and unfavorable truths to cause tension and hate between different groups of people. Goebbels' work fascinated CFR member Edward R. Murrow. The Rockefeller Foundation funded Murrow to perform a systematic analysis of Nazi radio propaganda techniques and the political use of radio. Murrow, with help from Cantrill and Lloyd Free, began the project at Princeton in 1940. The Princeton Listening Center was set up in an old house on Alexander Street belonging to Princeton's Institute of Advanced Study, known as the IASP. IASP was a reasonable copy of the Royal Institute of International Affairs Chief Oxford Headquarters, All Souls College. CFR member Abraham Flexner of Rockefeller's General Education Board and Foundation Administrator organized it from plans drawn by Tom Jones, one of the Royal Institute of International Affairs' most active intriguers and Foundation's administrators. This project resulted in a worldwide monitoring and broadcasting government agency called the Foreign Broadcast Intelligence Service, known as FBIS. FBIS was a psychological warfare machine. FBIS became the United States Information Agency, or USIA. The USIA was established to achieve United States foreign policy by influencing public attitude at home and abroad using psycho-political policy strategies. The USIA Office of Research and Reference Service prepares data on psychological factors and propaganda problems considered by the Policy Planning Board in formulating psycho-political information policies for the National Security Council. Edward R. Murrow would subsequently be named head of the USIA. Murrow became the propaganda minister for the United States. In effect, America's Joseph Goebbels. Was Hitler's rise to power a psycho-political operation planned and coordinated by members of the Council on Foreign Relations, Institutes of International Affairs, and Institutes of Pacific Relations? Was Hitler's rise to power another double-cross to hell, 2X, 2L, another Council on Foreign Relations experiment in fear? And if it was, and ladies and gentlemen, I know absolutely that it was, for they needed a terrible world war to propel the world into a world government under a United Nations. And isn't that treason? People's actions, ladies and gentlemen, even yours, are strongly influenced by their knowledge base. You see, people act upon their beliefs, not facts, but upon their beliefs. You see, you can manipulate a person's actions by corrupting their knowledge base, by warping historical truth or ignoring it completely. Knowledge can make for independence if it helps people meet their world more confidently and realistically, but that can only happen when people are dealing with facts and with the truth. Those who have wanted others to remain dependent have always recognized this fact and have opposed the spread of knowledge. They include those who felt the Bible must not be read by the people, those who made laws against teaching slaves to read and write, and those who kept the plans of a monster like Hitler a secret for more than 14 years. Don't you think it's time to investigate the Council on Foreign Relations, the Institutes of International Affairs, and the Institutes of Pacific Relations? And yes, even Art Bell. You see, the alien threat is presented through the use of secret technology originally developed by the Germans in their secret weapons programs during World War II, by geniuses like Nikola Tesla and many others. Most military and government personnel who have access to this material believe the threat is real. None of them, not even one, however, has ever seen any evidence of the existence of any extraterrestrial creature or any advanced technology other than that of human origin. It is extremely difficult, if not almost impossible, to believe that top-secret documentation could be lies. I know. I had one of the highest security clearances that can be held by anyone, and I had access to all of this information, and what I am telling you is the truth. It is trust in government by good men and women who have given their lives in its service that keeps the real secret from the public eye. And the real secret is that there are no extraterrestrials, ladies and gentlemen. There is, absolutely is, a lot of advanced technology, mind control projects, and psychological operations. All so-called leaks are intentional misinformation projects designed to promote the alien threat scenario while allowing for complete deniability on the part of the government. The antics of Vicky Cooper Ecker, who is a CIA operative, Donald Francis Ecker III, who is just a dupe, William Moore and Jamie Chandray, Stanton T. Friedman, Bruce Maccabee, who works for the Central Intelligence Agency and the Office of Naval Intelligence, Barry Taff, who is a neuropsychiatric institute of the University of California in Los Angeles, and he works with Dr. Jolyon West, Whitley Strieber, Bud Hopkins, who is a member of the Central Intelligence Agency, John Lear, who is a member of the Central Intelligence Agency, Linda Moulton Howe, who is a member of the Order of the Eastern Star, Art Bell, who is admitted Freemason and a fellow traveler, Glenn Campbell, George Knapp, who is also a Freemason, Colonel Philip Corso, a CIA operative who has just recently died, Richard Hoagland, the so-called alien autopsy film, The Face on Mars, which is not there, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the so-called Mars meteorite, which supposedly contains fossil evidence of life on Mars, but does not at all contain any such evidence. The War of the Worlds, presented by the Mercury Theater on the Air, and many other people and events, are all projects of this type. Some, very few, however, of these people are unwitting accomplices in the charade and truly believe in the extraterrestrial threat. Most of those whom I have just named, and many others not named, however, are active and with full knowledge agents of Illuminism and socialism. The most well-known are active fellow travelers. Communist agents of the KGB, the Central Intelligence Agency, are one of the many psychological warfare agencies founded by the Rhodes Roundtable Group, known as the Group, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the Council on Foreign Relations. The plan, ladies and gentlemen, to create an artificial alien threat to the Earth was first mentioned by the Marxist John Dewey, who is also the founder of our failing educational system. He said, quote, "Someone remarked that the best way to unite all the nations on this globe would be an attack from some other planet. In the face of such an alien enemy, people would respond with a sense of their unity of interest and purpose." He said that, ladies and gentlemen, at a dinner in New York in 1917. That's right. You heard it right, folks. 1917. The premise was tested for credibility with the CBS presentation of War of the Worlds by Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on October 30th, 1938. The public believed the War of the Worlds was an actual news broadcast, thus setting the stage for the implementation of an alien threat scenario. The only problem, ladies and gentlemen, was that the state-of-the-art of technology at that time did not allow for a believable presentation. But the development of saucer-shaped wingless and tailless flying machines by the Germans during World War II, the implementation of psychological warfare against the sheeple of the world, and the continued development of secret technology under black projects classified and compartmentalized so that not even anyone in the Congress can ever know what it is that these people have, solved the problem. President Ronald Reagan said this in a speech made to the 42nd General Assembly of the United Nations on September the 21st, 1987. And I quote, "In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us realize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world." He inserted that paragraph in 8 speeches during his time as president. We obtained this CIA document through the Freedom of Information Act and through court battles. It's on Central Intelligence Agency letterhead, and it's from the Office of the Director. To the Director, Psychological Strategy Board, subject flying saucers. 1. I am today transmitting to the National Security Council a proposal, tab A, in which it is concluded that the problems connected with unidentified flying objects appear to have implications for psychological warfare as well as for intelligence and operations. 2. The background for this view is presented in some detail in tab B. 3. I suggest that we discuss at an early board meeting the possible offensive or defensive utilization of these phenomena for psychological warfare purposes. Signed, Walter B. Smith, Director. The announcement of the Jewish Holocaust, the proposal of a world government which would prevent future genocide or wars by the formation of a United Nations in 1945, and the announcement of sightings of flying saucers by Kenneth Arnold, an ex-intelligence officer, in 1947, launched the deception. The natural guilt harbored by the men of the 509th Atomic Bomb Wing, stationed just outside Roswell, New Mexico, after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, made them eager conspirators in orchestrating the faked crash of an extraterrestrial craft and the discovery of shaved and surgically altered monkeys near Roswell, New Mexico. The artificial extraterrestrial threat was thus implanted in the minds of the public. And we recently obtained an FBI document through the Freedom of Information Act and through many court battles. From the FBI, Dallas, Director and Senior Agent in Charge, Cincinnati, flying disc information concerning, and then it's blacked out, Headquarters, 8th Air Force, telephonically advised this office that an object purporting to be a flying disc was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico this date. The disc is hexagonal in shape and was suspended from a balloon by cable, which balloon was approximately 20 feet in diameter. The next word or words are blacked out. Further advised that the object found resembles a high-altitude weather balloon with a radar reflector, but that telephonic conversation between their office and Wright Field had not, and the next two words are blacked out, borne out this belief. Disc and balloon being transported to Wright Field by special plane for examination. Information provided this office because of national interest in case. And fact that National Broadcasting Company, Associated Press, and others attempting to break story of location of disc today. Two words blacked out. Advised would request Wright Field to advise Cincinnati office results of examination. No further investigation being conducted. And then there are some further lines blacked out on the bottom. Ladies and gentlemen, applying Hitler's concept of the big lie, the artificial extraterrestrial threat was nurtured and built into an always present possibility over the next 50 years. Utilizing the psychological machine of the United States government and the intelligence community, and the partnership built between the Department of Defense and Hollywood during World War II. Eventually, a large percentage of the world's population found themselves believing in alien ships, extraterrestrial visitation, alien mutilation of animals, and alien abductions of humans with absolutely, and listen to me closely, absolutely no proof that extraterrestrials exist anywhere in the universe, much less that any have ever visited this planet. The artificial threat is further advanced through the mind-control programming of Marxists and communists in Hollywood, radio, television, advertising, publishing houses, and the ufology movement, all of which are in the complete control of the Illuminati and the intelligence community. Fear is instilled through the incidental use of terror, inspired by the cattle and animal mutilation byproducts of the government's secret low-level radiation monitoring operations, and the so-called alien abduction scenario induced by state-of-the-art and extremely sophisticated mind control operations. Wake up, America, you've been had.